I'm going to tell you something I've never said out loud because every time I replay that moment in my head, my chest tightens the same way it did back then. I spent 10 years building a company from a garage-sized startup into an $85 million machine, piece by piece, deal by deal, night by night. And the day it finally became everything we had dreamed of, my boss, my mentor, the man I trusted like family, looked me straight in the eyes, smiled, and said his son would be taking over. That was the moment something inside me tore quietly, like fabric stretched too long. I joined the company when it was nothing more than 2 desks, a dying printer, and a whiteboard full of ideas we weren't sure would ever work. He hired me because I was the only one willing to take a chance on him. And he said he saw something in me, drive, hunger, whatever you want to call it. Back then he spoke softly, like every sentence carried a blueprint. He'd pat my shoulder and say, "You and I are going to build something worth remembering." And I believed him. I really did. I let that belief shape my entire 20s. Those early years felt like living inside a storm we were trying to control. I'd come in before the sun rose and leave long after the streetlights were on. I remember the feeling of unlocking the door when it was still cold enough to see my breath. I'd turn on the lights, hear the hum of the old HVAC kicking in, and think, one day this place will be huge. I wasn't dreaming of millions. I was dreaming of stability, of pride, of the moment my boss would look at me and say, "You made this possible." He used to bring me greasy breakfast sandwiches when we pulled all-nighters. He'd joke that startups don't need sleep, they need stubborn people. I was stubborn enough for both of us. When he signed our first major client, he hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe for a second. It felt like winning a championship. I remember thinking, this is the man I'll follow for the rest of my life. I know how naive that sounds now. As the company grew, so did my responsibilities. Sales, operations, partnerships. If it kept the engine running, I was touching it. He gave me the title director, even though I was doing the work of 3 departments. But it didn't matter. The company was becoming something real, and I was part of the spine holding it up. Every investor meeting, every new office upgrade, every milestone, he'd look at me and nod like we were sharing a secret. "We're getting there." He'd say things like, "You're the son I never had," which I brushed off because he laughed after saying it, but there was a softness in his eyes. I didn't know then how literal that sentence would become, or how much I'd come to resent it. The first time I met his actual son, the kid walked into the office, wearing flip-flops and an ironic t-shirt, glancing around like he was touring a museum he wasn't impressed by. My boss introduced him too casually. "This is my boy. He's just finishing college. Maybe he'll join us someday." I shook his hand. His grip was limp, distracted. I didn't think about it again. I should have. Years went by, and I started to feel the weight of everything I'd built. The team trusted me more than they trusted the boss. Clients called me first. Vendors negotiated with me, not him. I was the one people turned to when things went sideways, and he knew it. He'd joke that if I ever left, the whole place would collapse. I didn't realize that was his biggest fear. Then came the year everything exploded. In a good way, or at least I thought so then. A major investor valued us at $85 million. The office celebrated like we had just taken a rocket to the moon. He pulled me aside that night, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "You've done more for me than you know." I felt this rush, like he was finally going to say the words I'd waited a decade to hear, that I'd become a partner, that I'd earned a real seat at the table, that my 10 years of sacrifice meant something. But he didn't say anything else, just squeezed my shoulder and walked away to refill his drink. I told myself he was saving the big talk for Monday, when the dust settled. I went home that night feeling proud and exhausted, thinking about how life was finally about to click into place. Monday came. He called me into the conference room, the big one we used for investor meetings. He was smiling, that warm, fatherly smile he used when he wanted to soften bad news. I sat down. He closed the door gently, like he was about to tell me a secret I'd treasure. "I've been thinking a lot," he started. about the future, about legacy. His voice had that rehearsed cadence, the kind people use before delivering something they know won't land well. Then he said the sentence that would split my life cleanly into before and after. It's time to bring my son into a leadership role. He'll be taking over the company. I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, the part where he'd explain my role, my promotion, the reason I'd sacrificed a decade of my life. But he just smiled like this was a natural, almost inevitable evolution, a family business passing to the next generation. Except I wasn't family. I was the worker who built the house he was now giving away. You'll be his right hand, he added. He's green, but with you guiding him, he'll grow into it. In that moment, something in the room went hollow. Not loud, not dramatic, just empty. Like oxygen had leaked out through a crack I couldn't see. I nodded slowly, because that's what people do when their world tilts, and they're trying not to fall over. He patted my arm. "You've always been like a son to me," he said. And for the first time in 10 years, I realized that being like a son wasn't the same as being one. His son showed up on his first day wearing a suit that still had the retail folds in the sleeves, like he'd bought it the night before just to look the part. He walked around the office greeting people the way tourists greet museum staff, polite, detached, already scanning for something more interesting. My boss introduced him with a proud arm across his shoulder, and I could feel the team's eyes flicking toward me, quietly asking the question no one wanted to say out loud. Is this really happening? I tried to keep it together. I told myself that maybe the kid had hidden potential, that maybe he'd surprise us. But within the first hour, he sat in my office chair, pointed at the dashboard I'd built from scratch, and asked, "So, which of these numbers actually matter?" He didn't say it rudely. That almost made it worse. He said it with the blank curiosity of someone who had never felt the consequences of getting anything wrong. Over the next days, he hovered behind me during calls, interrupted strategy discussions with half-baked ideas, and treated every meeting like a homework assignment he forgot to read for. My boss kept saying, "Give him time, he'll get there." But every minute I spent cleaning up the kids' decisions was another minute I wasn't doing the work that actually kept our clients from leaving. And then he started taking credit. It happened in small ways at first. A passing comment about his plan when the plan was mine, referring to my partnerships as our new deals, telling vendors he was running the ship. I corrected things gently, thinking maybe he didn't know the impact of what he was doing, but he knew. I could see it in the way he adjusted his tone when his father walked into the room, how his posture straightened, how he performed. One afternoon, he barged into my office holding a printed email. "We lost the Harper account," he said, like he was informing me of the weather. That account had taken me 16 months to land. I read the email. It wasn't a lost deal. It was a client requesting clarification after he'd sent them a nonsense proposal that contradicted our contract. I told him we could fix it. He shrugged, already bored. "Just handle it." But that was just the beginning. He started overriding my approvals. He replied to clients without looping me in, giving discounts that made no financial sense. He scheduled meetings while I was double booked, then told people I'd mix things up sometimes. He walked into the bullpen with a confidence he hadn't earned, introducing small policy changes like he was reinventing the company. The team played along, but their eyes told the truth. Confusion, frustration, fear. They trusted me. They tolerated him. My boss stopped by my office more often, wearing that calm managerial smile people use when they're hoping you won't say something they don't want to hear. "He's trying," he'd say. "Guide him a little." He used the word guide like I was mentoring a promising intern, not babysitting a grown man who couldn't manage his own inbox. One Friday morning, the kids stormed into my office, waving a spreadsheet. "Why did you tell the team no overtime this week?" he demanded. I looked up. "Because we hit quota early and people are burning out," he scoffed. "We're an $85 million company. We don't slow down because people are tired." He said it like fatigue was a personal choice, like exhaustion wasn't the currency I had spent 10 years paying in. He walked out and gathered everyone for a meeting, one he hadn't planned and had no agenda for. He made a speech about efficiency and momentum, peppered with corporate buzzwords he clearly didn't understand. Then he did the one thing that finally cracked something inside me. He announced a mandatory weekend sprint. I felt 20 sets of eyes slide toward me again, waiting. The air shifted. I stepped forward and said calmly, "This wasn't approved." He smiled, that smug little half-smile of someone who thinks authority is inherited, not earned. "Well," he said, "I'm approving it now." The room went silent. I could hear my heartbeat. I looked at the team, people who had followed me through hell for years, and I saw the exhaustion in their faces, the dread, the resentment. Something inside me crystallized. I said, "Everyone, take 5. I need a word with him." We walked into my office. He didn't sit. He leaned against the desk like he owned the place. "If you're going to survive in leadership," he said, "you'll need to stop being everyone's friend." I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly. Then I told him clearly and without heat, "Leadership isn't the job. Responsibility is, and you're not ready for either." He blinked. I could see the flash of anger, the fragile ego behind the expensive suit. And for a brief moment, he didn't know what to say. His silence was the first real quiet he'd brought into the building since he arrived. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. He stormed out, and within an hour my boss called me into the conference room. He had that look, the one that mixed disappointment with fear. "You need to be patient with him," he said. "He's learning." I asked him, "At whose expense?" He didn't answer. I walked out of that room with a strange, calm certainty settling in my chest. Not anger, not bitterness, just the quiet realization that I was propping up a structure that had stopped valuing the hands holding it up. That night, I stopped being the hero. Chaos didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in quietly, the way water finds cracks you never noticed. At first, it was just uneasy glances in the bullpen, whispers behind closed doors, a few clients asking why communication felt different lately. Then a week later, the numbers started dipping. Not dramatically, just enough to make people nervous. I watched it unfold from the inside like someone watching their own house settle in strange, unfamiliar ways, hearing the creaks, but unable to place the direction they were coming from. The son kept making decisions with the confidence of someone who had never suffered consequences. He changed our onboarding process without understanding it. He promised features we didn't have. He lengthened deadlines that clients needed. Shortened deadlines the team needed lengthened. He walked around with a swagger that wasn't earned, carrying a notebook he never actually wrote in, repeating the phrase, "We're scaling too fast to slow down," like it meant something. But the worst part wasn't his incompetence. It was watching my boss ignore reality. When the Harper account pulled out, my boss said it was a natural client cycle. When a second long-term partner froze their contract, he called it market fluctuations. When 3 department heads asked for a meeting about the son's leadership, he said they were resistant to change. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just watched. Observing a system breakdown isn't loud. It's mechanical, procedural, almost predictable. One evening, after everyone left, I walked through the office alone. The lights hummed softly, the kind of sound you only notice when everything else is quiet. Desks sat in half-organized disarray, papers stacked in ways I never allowed before, a whiteboard full of half-formed ideas, arrows pointing nowhere, crossed-out numbers someone didn't bother to erase properly. I stood there looking at all of it and realized I wasn't seeing a company anymore. I was seeing the aftermath of decisions I didn't make. The next morning, a senior engineer pulled me aside. He closed my office door gently, like we were about to exchange secrets. "When are you taking over?" he asked, not with hope, just exhaustion. I didn't know what to say. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected the silence. We just need someone who knows what they're doing, he added almost apologetically. That wasn't the only conversation. 2 more people approached me privately that week, and then 5, and then 9. They weren't asking for a revolution, they were asking for survival. And then something happened that changed the trajectory entirely. A major client scheduled an emergency call. They'd received a pitch from the boss's son, some Frankenstein mix of ideas he'd pulled from old presentations and buzzwords he'd heard online. It contradicted their contract and essentially implied we'd been overcharging them for months. They wanted answers. Serious ones. My boss called me into his office with the kind of tight smile people use when they're begging the universe to give them one more miracle. Fix it, he said. Not a request. A command born from the blind. Hope that I'd always be able to salvage whatever his son destroyed. I walked out of his office and felt something settle inside me. A final, quiet click. Not anger, not spite. Just clarity. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. Over the next week, I did what I'd always done. Held everything together. I rebuilt the pitch, soothed the client, redrafted deliverables, and reframed the mess into something salvageable. The son strutted around afterward like he'd personally revived the company. My boss patted his shoulder and said, "See? You're getting it." I didn't correct either of them, because by then I was done correcting people who didn't listen, but while I was fixing their fires, I was doing something else too. Something deliberate. Something they didn't see. I started collecting every process I'd built, every system, every workflow, every client strategy, not stealing, just reclaiming the intellectual property I had created, the same way an artist keeps copies of their own work. I documented everything the company depended on, all the things no one else understood. I reviewed my contract, carefully, quietly, thoroughly. I found the gaps they never patched. I found the clauses they forgot existed. And I realized something important. They had no leverage to keep me. Not legally, not operationally, not structurally. The house looked solid from the street, but I knew which beams were hollow. People started approaching me after hours, not in groups, never groups, one at a time. A designer who was tired of constant scope creep, a manager who was done cleaning up the son's mistakes, a developer who said he'd quit if I did, a sales rep who whispered, "If you jump, I'm right behind you." I didn't ask for their loyalty. They offered it because they knew where the company actually lived, inside the systems I ran and the stability I gave them, and the boss never understood that. His son didn't even know it was happening. Then came the breaking point. The son called a leadership meeting. He walked in late, holding a smoothie and wearing the same bored expression he always had. Then he said he wanted to pivot the brand toward a younger demographic. His idea was a complete departure from our core business model, one that would alienate half our client base and require millions in infrastructure we didn't have. When I raised a concern, he cut me off with, "Look, not everything needs your approval." Something cold moved through me, not rage, clarity, a deeper clarity than I'd ever felt. I looked around the table at the people who had built this place with me. Their faces told the truth. Fear, frustration, resignation, and something else. Hope. Not in him. In whatever I was about to say. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, "Good luck with the pivot," stood up, and walked out. He laughed, thinking I was being dramatic. My boss frowned, but he didn't stop me. Neither of them understood what that moment meant. But the team did. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from the engineer. "If you're leaving, I'm not staying here." Then another. "Tell me where and when." Then another, and another. By that evening, 12 people had contacted me privately. And as I sat in my car in the parking lot, engine off, staring at the building I had poured a decade of my life into, something washed over me, a calm I hadn't felt in years. The decision wasn't emotional, it wasn't impulsive, it wasn't revenge. It was simply the moment I accepted the truth. I wasn't leaving the company. The company had already left me. And what came next? They were never going to see coming. I didn't resign in a blaze of fury. I didn't slam doors or give speeches. I walked in early on a Tuesday when the office was still quiet, and the only sound was the coffee machine sputtering in the break room. My boss wasn't in yet, but his son was, feet on the desk, scrolling his phone, humming something off key. He barely glanced at me. Maybe he thought I'd come to apologize, to fold myself back into the role he'd assigned me. I didn't say a word to him. I went straight to HR, handed over a clean, precise resignation letter, and returned my key card. The HR director's expression shifted from confusion to panic when she realized what was happening. She called my boss. He didn't pick up. She called again. Nothing. I thanked her, turned around and walked out before she could find the words she was scrambling for. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was him. Come to my office now. I didn't go. I was already on the highway. Windows cracked open. The first real breath of freedom hitting me like cold air after a long fever. But that wasn't the part they didn't see coming. By the end of the week, 5 people submitted their resignations, then 7 more, then 3 senior managers. My phone filled with quiet, steady messages. Let me know where you land. I'm with you if you start something. I can't stay here now. I told everyone the same thing. Leave only if it's right for you. And they understood. They didn't follow me out of loyalty. They left because the structure holding the company together was already hollow. I had just been the last beam keeping the roof from collapsing. Meanwhile, the boss's son panicked. He tried calling emergency meetings, issuing pep talks, announcing initiatives that didn't make sense, even on paper. He blamed market pressure, competitors, algorithms, the economy. Everything but himself. My boss finally called me 3 days after I resigned. The voice that once sounded like authority now sounded like someone bracing for a fall. We need to talk, he said, breath tight. You can't just walk away like this. I said calmly, I already have. He inhaled sharply, like he wasn't prepared for how simple that answer was. You don't understand what you're doing to us. But I did. I didn't hang up on him. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, take care. Then ended the call. It was the gentlest goodbye I could give. A man who had chosen to hand his life's work to someone who couldn't carry it. In the weeks that followed, I worked quietly. No announcements, no grand reveal. I rented a modest office, nothing fancy, just enough for a desk, a whiteboard, and a handful of chairs. I called a few former clients, not to poach them, not with a pitch. I told them I was starting something new and wished them well if they stayed where they were. Most asked where to sign before I even finished the sentence. Then came the applications. People I had never expected to leave the old company sent resumes with messages like, if there's room for me, I'd be honored. I hired slowly, carefully. The new project didn't need to be a giant. It just needed to be clean, honest, functional. Built the right way this time. The first month, we ran lean. The second, we broke even. The third, we were already surpassing the old company's quarterly numbers. Not because we were bigger, because we were sharper, lighter, aligned, and then inevitably the old company began to crumble. Clients left, operations stalled, departments collapsed under incompetent leadership. Investors started calling my phone, not to ask me to come back, but to ask what had gone wrong over there. I didn't answer those calls. It wasn't my story to tell anymore. 6 months later, my boss reached out again, this time through email. The tone was different. No anger, no pride. Just a man asking for help. Can we meet? Just a conversation, off the record. I sat with that email for a long moment. I wasn't angry at him anymore. I wasn't anything at him. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. There was no revenge left to deliver, no speech to give, no justice to chase. Everything that needed to happen had already unfolded naturally. Still, I agreed to meet. We met at a small cafe downtown. He looked older than I remembered. Not dramatically, just worn down, like a man who had spent months holding things that kept slipping through his fingers. He ordered coffee but barely touched it. The silence between us wasn't tense. It was the kind that comes when two people are standing on opposite sides of a long, quiet truth. He finally spoke. I should have handled things differently. I didn't nod. I didn't soften it. I just let the statement hang there. He tried again. I didn't realize how much the company depended on you. I said calmly, you did. You just thought I'd never leave. He closed his eyes for a second, a small gesture, almost like pain. Is there any way, any chance, you could come back for a while? Help stabilize things? Consult, at least. For a moment I saw flashes of the past. Late-night planning sessions, the pride of our first big win, the early years when everything felt possible. It flickered, then faded. I'm not going back, I said. No anger, no cruelty, just truth. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer, but hoped saying it out loud might change it. He slid a folder across the table. Financials, projections, desperate numbers. I didn't open it. I pushed it gently back toward him. You'll figure out what to do, I said. But it won't involve me. He swallowed, eyes dropping to the folder before pulling it back toward his chest like a shield. For the first time, he looked small, human, tired. We stood. He reached out a hand. I shook it because we weren't enemies. We were just two people who took different roads at the same fork. He didn't ask for anything else. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, cleaner, lighter. My phone buzzed with a message from one of my new employees about a client win. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. I walked down the street with the quiet understanding that sometimes life doesn't give you dramatic victories. Sometimes it gives you something better, clarity, autonomy, the chance to build something without waiting for permission. He had once told me I was like a son to him, but standing there in the sunlight, I finally understood. I was never meant to inherit someone else's legacy. I was meant to build my own.